Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be lifted.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I rise today to speak about the looming August 2nd deadline for raising the debt ceiling and making reforms or budget cuts at least that would allow us to show that we are not going to have business as usual in Washington, but that we are going to raise the debt ceiling with the reforms that are necessary. Despite the differences in this body, we are all here to share three concerns. First, we do know at this point, because of the time that it has taken us to cobble together something that could be put through both of our houses and signed by the President, that we have fundamental differences in the principles of how we should run our government. I think it is very clear. The Republicans have stood for no taxes, especially in this economic environment. We believe that piling taxes on top of the cost of the Obama health care system that is in the process of being implemented would keep our businesses from hiring people and getting this 9.1% unemployment rate down. I think we all agree that we need to bring that unemployment rate down, but we have fundamental differences about what's causing it and how we can solve it. Number two, we all agree, I believe, or 95% of us agree, that we cannot default on the debt in our country. I do believe in both houses, the vast majority believe that we should not go into default, and the costs of a default are not being considered nearly enough. The costs of a default, of interest rates going up, of having to do back pay, having to correct some of the many issues that we will face by having some of the people who are owed money not paid and having to pay interest and extra interest if we are in default. We cannot allow that to happen. I think we all agree on that. And we are all troubled with the delay in resolving this issue. The delay, I think, has been caused for many reasons. Of course, our fundamental differences are one, but I believe that although members of Congress and leaders in Congress have been talking for a long time, I think the President did not get involved until just 2 weeks or so ago, and has never put forward a real plan and then talked to members of Congress one-on-one about having his plan or some iteration of his plan go forward. Now, the Senate Majority Leader and the House Speaker have put forward plans. I believe that there is a common ground that can be found between these two proposals, but they are not the same. In fact, I think the Republican leader in the Senate has also put forward a plan, and I think we're seeing the different pieces of the plans that have been put forward now starting to come together. I believe the Boehner plan is a good one. I believed in the cut, cap, and balance plan, where you cut spending now to make your down payment, you cap spending every year for the next 10 years at a level that brings down the overall deficit, and you send a balanced budget to the states for ratification. I feel so certain if we could pass a balanced budget from this Congress and send it to the states, it would be ratified, and it would put us on the real course for fiscal responsibility, the course that would assure that Social Security is sound, that Medicare works, and that our children and grandchildren will not inherit a debilitating debt that hurts our economy. So I do believe that cut, cap, and balance was the right way forward. But, Mr. President, Congress is split. We have a majority of Democrats in the Senate and Republicans in the House. Therefore, we're not going to get everything that any one of us believes is right. And certainly we're not going to get the Boehner plan in the Senate. But it is the right approach. And we will have to take a few steps at a time, and I hope that we will be able to come to terms on that way forward with the principles of cutting spending, putting a cap on spending, and not raising the debt ceiling any more than the cuts that can be counted. And that's what is a concern to me about the Reid plan. Senator Reid is calling for $2.7 trillion in an increase in the debt ceiling. The purpose, as the President has stated, is to get through the next election in 2012 and not deal with this again. But, Mr. President, the next election should not be the focus. The focus should be, how do we show that our country is on the right track to get this enormous debt whittled down by whittling down the deficits and having sound budget principles. This $2.7 trillion would be the largest debt ceiling increase in the history of America. The previous largest debt limit increase was $1.9 trillion, which President Obama signed into law in February of last year. This debt ceiling increase in Senator Reid's proposal is not paid for. It offers $1 trillion in cuts for a $2.7 trillion increase. Many of those cuts are illusory. They are not cuts that can be counted. To say that we're going to label $1 trillion of cuts savings from leaving Afghanistan and Iraq is just not credible. We don't know what the obstacles are going to be in Afghanistan and possibly Iraq. We also don't know what we might have to do in the Middle East going forward. Afghanistan is not settled, Mr. President, and we have to have a certain level of stability on the ground in Afghanistan, or we will have wasted the billions that we have already spent and the lives of our military personnel in Afghanistan, because it will go back to the way it was before, a center for terrorism that will come to our country or can come to our country. It did once already. And we have been over there to try to wipe out al-Qaeda and the Taliban, which has been in league with al-Qaeda. We have been over there losing American lives and spending American taxpayer dollars to protect our country from another 9/11. To say that we're going to cut $1 trillion in the future over the next 10 years when we aren't placing the emphasis on what are the conditions on the ground is not sound policy, and it's certainly not sound national security policy. So that's illusory. And then the other parts of the cuts that I think are very hard to decipher are cutting waste, fraud, and abuse, which we all want to do, but we don't have the guarantee of those cuts. So I think it is important for us to look at the cuts and try to make sure that if we're going to raise the debt ceiling, we raise it only the amount of the actual cuts that we can produce. In the Majority Leader's Reid's legislation, there is a joint committee. There is also one in the Boehner bill. But in the Majority Leader's legislation, the committee has to report, but its product doesn't have to be passed and enacted before the debt ceiling is lifted. Now, that's the real problem in Senator Reid's proposal. The bill would lose its expedited status, and the Joint Committee would dissolve on January the 13th of 2012 under Senator Reid's proposal, and then we would still have the lifting of the debt ceiling that has already been enacted. That is not the way to go forward. The Joint Committee proposed in the Boehner Plan is forced to produce savings. And the forcing mechanism in this case is the fact that the debt limit can't be increased unless the cuts are enacted. So you will keep the governor on the debt increase by assuring that there have to be cuts in spending dollar for dollar. And third, there's no balanced budget amendment included in the Reid proposal, and in fact, there's no requirement that we even vote on a balanced budget amendment. Now, I know that it would be very difficult to pass a balanced budget amendment right now out of Congress, but I do believe it is the best thing we could do for the long-term security of our country. So I would hope that as we come together, because we know the reality here, the Reid bill is not going to pass the House, and the Boehner bill is not going to pass the Senate exactly. So we've got to come together with a plan. Maybe it's a short-term plan that just has a dollar-for-dollar cut along with the raising of the debt ceiling. Or maybe we can get more after we dispatch with the two bills that are now before the Congress and try to put something together that has the best parts of both. I could not support the Reid plan as it is today, and I do support the Boehner plan, but I also know that neither of them is going to pass the other house. So I think it is incumbent on us to now go forward and let's quickly start doing the work that could produce results, and that is to try to get the best of both of these before the August 2nd deadline. And I think we've got to be open to what can work that stay within the principles of no tax increases and no debt ceiling increase without the same amount of dollars at least to be cut from spending, with real cuts that can be assured. I think the American public is looking not for promises, but for the assurance in the law that we will not be able to raise the debt ceiling without some cutting of spending and reforms that would equal the amount that the debt ceiling is increased. We can go forward, Mr. President, with those principles, which I think both sides would agree to at this final few hours that we have before that debt ceiling is reached. But it is time to vote on these bills and then get down to the real work of determining what is the best in both that we can pass in both houses. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor. And I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.